Hello everyone and welcome to Prof Talks. Today we'll be discussing ICH Q12, which is a guideline for product lifecycle management. So let us see the details. As per this guideline, it includes 9 important subpoints as the contents. First is introduction. Second is categorization of the post-approval CMC changes. Third is the established conditions. So we'll see what are established conditions, what are its impact onto the regulations. Fourth is the post-approval change management protocol, which is usually referred to as PACMP. Fifth will be the product lifecycle management document, which is PLCM. Sixth is the pharmaceutical quality system and change management. Seventh, relationship between the regulatory assessment and inspections. Eighth, structured approach for frequent CMC post-approval changes. And ninth is stability data approaches to support the evaluation of CMC changes. So first we'll look into some important aspects. What is post-approval CMC change? A post-approval CMC change are the modifications that are made to the approved pharmaceutical products and to provide data to support a change. What are established conditions? So established conditions are the elements in an application that are submitted to the regulatory authority and which are considered necessary to assure the product quality. And therefore, if they are changed, they would require a regulatory submission after their approval. A post-approval change management protocol is an approved protocol which provides an agreement between the manufacturing authorization holder and the regulatory authority. It serves as a regulatory tool requirements and studies needed to implement a post-approval change during product life cycle, including assessment of impact of proposed change and suggested reporting category. Product Lifecycle Management Document serves as a central repository in the Manufacturing Authorization Holder for ECCs and reporting categories for making changes to the established condition. It includes the key elements like established conditions, reporting categories of the changes to the established conditions, the post-approval change management protocol, and the post-approval commitments. Before moving ahead, please ensure that you have subscribed to the channel Prof Talks and have pressed the bell icon so that you can receive the notification of the upcoming presentations. Now we'll look into the detailed content of each of the part of this guideline. So going into the objective part, this guideline provides a framework to facilitate management of post-approval changes in a more predictable and efficient manner. It demonstrates how increased product and process knowledge can contribute to a more precise and accurate understanding of which post-approval changes would require a submission, as well as definition of level of reporting categories of such changes. The increased knowledge, effective implementation of tools and enablers described should enhance industry's ability to manage the CMC changes effectively under their own pharmaceutical quality system with less need of an extensive regulatory oversight prior to implementation. This approach can insensitivize the continual improvement with greater flexibility in making post-approval changes, and it could result in fewer submissions to the marketing authorizations and less regulatory burden. If we look into the scope, so this guideline is applicable to the pharmaceutical drug substance and drug product of both chemical and biological category that requires a marketing authorization. However, the changes to comply with new or revised pharmacopoeial monographs are not in the scope of this guideline. Under the introduction, it provides regulatory tools and enablers, which includes specifically the established conditions. We have seen at the starting of this presentation, established conditions provide clear understanding between the manufacturing authorization holder and the regulatory authorities regarding elements that assure product quality and will require a regulatory communication if they are changed. It describes how established conditions are identified, defines what information is supportive information, like all the information into an application is not established condition. So it clearly differentiates between the established conditions and the supporting information. So the supporting information is the information that if it is changed would not involve any regulatory communication. It defines the categorization of the post-approval CMC changes. It gives a framework for categorization of communication, which is a risk-based approach with the regulatory authority regarding the CMC change. The post-approval change management protocol, it is a regulatory tool regarding information required to support a CMC change and the type of regulatory submission based on prior agreement between the authorization holder and the regulatory authority. Such a mechanism enables planning and implementation of future changes to the ECs in an efficient and predictable manner. Continuing with the regulatory tools and enablers, it defines Product Lifecycle Management Document. It is a central repository for the established conditions and reporting category for changes made to the ECs. Document also captures how a product will be managed during commercial phase, including relevant post-approval CMC commitments and the post-approval change management protocols. The pharmaceutical quality system and the change management. The effective pharmaceutical quality system as per ICH Q12 and compliance with the regular regional GMPs are necessary to gain a full benefit. Management of manufacturing changes across supply chain is also essential. The guideline provides recommendation for robust change management across single or multiple entities involved in the manufacturing. The relationship between regulatory assessment and inspection. It gives and outlines the complementary roles of regulatory assessment and inspection in oversight of post-approval changes and how communication between assessors and inspectors facilitate the use of the tools. The next part under the same regulatory tools and enablers, it defined the structured approach for frequent CMC post-approval changes. So it describes the strategy for a structured approach and a discussion of data expectation to enable use of intermediate or other post-implementation notifications. The stability data approaches to support the change. So it provides an additional science and risk-based approaches that are relevant to strategies for confirmatory stability studies to enable more timely implementation of the CMC change. Moving to the second point, that is categorization of the post-approval CMC changes. So it includes CMC changes vary from low to high potential to the risk to the product quality. Hence, a well-characterized risk-based categorization of regulatory communication is a requirement and it is very important. CMC changes during commercial phases are classified based on the potential risk to the product quality. So, regulatory communication category, supporting documentation, and the time frame for evaluation are commensurate with the level of risk. Based on potential risk, an inspection may be needed. Regulatory authority utilize a risk-based approach for regulatory processes to categorize the risks and the notification into three different categories. First, requesting prior approval from the regulatory authority to implement a change, notifying a regulatory authority about a change and implementing it, and third is simply recording the CMC changes within timeframes for decision. If we look into the prior approval, certain changes with sufficient risk require a regulatory authority review and approval prior to the implementation. And notifications are certain moderate to low risk low risk changes that do not require prior approval. They are communicated to the authority as notification within a defined period or after implementation. A mechanism for immediate notification is useful when prior approval is not required. Changes not required to be reported to the regulators are managed and documented into the pharmaceutical quality system and may be verified during inspection. Harmonization towards a system of risk-based categorization of the post-approval changes is an important step for the objectives of this guideline. Thus, such a system provides an inherent valuable flexibility in the regulatory approach and provide opportunities for lowering the regulatory submissions, use of a lower category for request and notification if certain criteria are met, providing options for converging to same or similar reporting category as that in other jurisdiction. A risk-based categorization system may be accomplished by having principles captured in regulations with further details in guidance, which can provide additional flexibility to modify expectations as science and technology evolve. Now we move to the third point, that is established condition. Introduction, as we have seen into the definition, established conditions for manufacturing control are the elements necessary to assure product quality and would require a regulatory submission if they are changed post approval. So ECs are legally binding information necessary to assure product quality. Any changes to the ECs require submission to the authority. If we see the EC in the regulatory dossier, all dossiers contain combination of the established condition and supporting information based on the knowledge gained throughout the product life cycle. So MAH should clearly identify the ECs, reporting category for changes to the ECs and supporting information. Rationale should be provided in the submission document for identifying those specific ECs and reporting categories of changes to these ECs. It should be noted that unless specified by regulatory requirement, identifying the ECs is not mandatory, and established conditions should not be confused with regulatory commitments. Changes to the regulatory commitments are managed as per local regulations. Now, going to identification of ECs, this guideline outlines the approach to identify and define the ECs for manufacturing and analytical process. Similar approach can be used to define other established conditions like for the container closure system, and they should be justified by the applicant and approved by the regulatory agency. Extent of established condition may vary based on company's development approach, product and process understanding, and potential risk to the product quality. Established conditions are defined based on product and process understanding into account all relevant elements of control strategy. Process parameters that need to be controlled to ensure product quality should be considered established conditions. ECs are identified through an initial risk assessment and application of knowledge gained from executed studies, the prior knowledge and criticality assessment, that is, the level of impact a process parameter could have on the quality of the product. The criticality assessment should account for the severity of harm and ranges to sufficient account for expected variability in the ECs. The critical process parameters and other process parameters where an impact on product quality cannot be reasonably excluded should be identified as ECs. So once the established conditions are identified for the manufacturing process, the reporting categories for these established conditions, that is changes to these established conditions, is based on the impact that is which they have, that is the risk they possess when they are changed. So if we can look at the decision tree, the first question that comes for identifying the impact is, does the parameter need to be controlled to ensure the product quality? If the answer is no, then it is not an EC and it is not reported. But if the answer to this question is yes, then it is an established condition. However, we come to the second question for defining the category, that is considering the output of criticality assessment, what is the potential risk to the product quality if the parameter is changed. So if the answer is a high risk, then it needs a prior approval for this change, and if it is a moderate or a low risk, then there's just notification. The guideline define approaches used for identification of the ECs. So basically there are two approaches. One is a parameter based approach. So in this there are two aspects: minimal approach and enhanced approach. If we see the minimal approach, there's a limited understanding of relationship between inputs and resulting quality attributes. So this will include large inputs of the material attribute, process parameters, and output, that is the in-process test. Whereas in the enhanced approach, there's an increased understanding of interaction between inputs and product quality attributes together with controlled strategy, and can lead to identification of ECs that are focused on most important input parameters along with output. The second approach is a performance-based approach and can be used primarily focused on control on process output rather than the process inputs, that is attributes, measurements, and it is enabled by knowledge gained from enhanced approach and enhanced control strategy like PAT. So could be considered for manufacturing process steps with inline monitoring of attributes. It ensures that all relevant parameters and material attributes with impact on product quality are monitored and equipment used remain qualified. Not all elements of decision tree apply, as enhanced control strategy used may remove need for certain process parameters to be ECs. Use of this guideline should not lead to providing a less detailed manufacturing process description in the manufacturing authorization. A detailed description should be provided, unless regardless of approach used to identify the ECs. Manufacturing process description includes supporting information as well as the ECs. Information regarding product-specific post-approval change activities such as post-approval monitoring may be provided as supporting information to aid determination of ECs and associated reporting categories. Criticality and risk should be periodically reviewed during product life cycle, and ECs and reporting categories should be updated. When implementing the change, MAH should consider impact of the planned change, whether concurrent changes are planned, and if originally proposed reporting categories should be revised. Non-performance to process-related ECs should be handled in accordance with GMP regulations, that is, deviations, non-conformances, etc. ECs related to the analytical procedures should include elements which assure performance of the procedure. Extent of ECs and their reporting categories could vary based on degree of understanding of relationship between method parameters and method performance, method complexity and control strategy. A justification to support the identification of the established condition and corresponding reporting categories for changes to the ECs based on risk management should be provided. When more limited development studies have been conducted, results will be narrow operating window to ensure method performance. In such cases, ECs may be more extensive with tight condition, whereas in the enhanced understanding can lead to a wider operating window and ensure method performance. A suitably detailed description of analytical procedure is expected to provide a clear understanding regardless of the approach used. Description of analytical procedure includes supportive information as well as identified ECs. If we look into the changes of revision of the ECs, MH can change the approved ECs based on knowledge gained during the product life cycle. Options available to change and revise the reporting category include appropriate post-approval regulatory submission describing and justifying the proposed revision, and submission of a PACMP, that is a change management protocol, in original authorization or as a part of post-approval submission describing revision to ECs or reporting categories and how change will be justified and reported, or use of approved post-approval regulatory commitment. And if we look at the roles and responsibilities, the primary responsibility is with the manufacturing authorization holder. However, a joint responsibility to share and utilize information between MAH and the manufacturing organization to ensure marketing authorization is maintained. For any reference submission, for example, type 2 DMF, holder of the reference submission has the responsibility to communicate the changes of ECs to the MAH. Moving to the fourth point, that is post-approval change management protocol. If we look at the definition, so it is a regulatory tool, and as it is an approved protocol, an agreement between MH and the regulatory authority, it provides predictability and transparency for requirements and studies to implement a change. The protocol describes the CMC change which the authorization holder intends to implement during the commercial phase, how the change would be prepared and verified, including assessment of impact and suggested reporting category. The protocol also identifies specific conditions and acceptance criteria to be met. It can address one or more changes for a single product or one or more changes to multiple products. The protocol may be submitted with original authorization or submitted as a standalone document. It requires approval by the regulatory authority. The conditions acceptance criteria outlined must be met and results communicated to the regulatory authority. The protocol should describe changes with details commensurate to the complexity. Once the protocol is approved, validity of the proposed approach and control strategy be confirmed prior to implementation. For example, if new information becomes available after approval of the protocol, initial risk assessment be reviewed before implementing the change to ensure validity of the outcome. If review indicates increased risk, relevant authorities should be consulted. The authorization holder is responsible for ensuring that whenever a CMC change is to be introduced under the protocol, facility meets the regulatory requirement where the protocol was approved with respect to the GMP compliance. Moving to the application part of the post-approval change management protocol. So there are two steps. Step one is the submission of a return protocol describing the proposed change, rationale, risk assessment activities, proposed studies, and acceptance criteria to assess the impact, other conditions to be met. Example, confirmation that there is no change to approved app specification, proposed reporting category. Protocol is reviewed and approved by the authority in advance of the execution. Step 2. Tests and studies outlined in the protocol are performed. If results meet the acceptance criteria, the authorization holder submits information to the authority according to categorization in the protocol. Depending on the reporting category, approval by regulatory authority may or may not be required prior to implementation, because it can be either a pre-approval change or it can be a notification. If the acceptance criteria are not met, the change cannot be implemented using this approach and should follow existing regulation or guidance associated with the reporting category. Significant changes to the manufacturing process that are not anticipated in the change management protocol of step 1 cannot be implemented as a part of step 2 and should be subjected to regulatory submission. However, minor unanticipated modification of the process or controls related to intended change and not affecting technical principles of protocols are considered within scope. Changes outlined in the change management protocol should not introduce any additional risk to the patient safety, product quality, or efficacy. A CMC change that would require supportive efficacy, safety to evaluate effect of the change is not suitable for inclusion in the protocol. Moving to the elements of the change management protocol. So it typically includes detailed description of the proposed change, including rationale. The difference before and after the proposed change should be clearly highlighted. Based on the initial risk assessment, a list of specific tests and studies to be performed to evaluate the impact, such as characterization, batch release. The protocol should include an appropriate description of analytical procedure and proposed acceptance criteria. Discussion regarding suitability of approved control strategy or any change needed to control strategy. Other conditions to be met, like confirmation that the process qualification steps will be completed before implementation. Where applicable, supporting data from previous experience with same or similar products related to development, manufacturing, categorization, batch release, and stability to allow for risk mitigation. Proposed reporting category for step 2 of the change management protocol. It also includes confirmation that ongoing verification will be performed under the pharmaceutical quality system to continue to evaluate and ensure that there is no adverse effect of the change on the product quality. In cases where monitoring of the impact on product quality of a change is required, a summary of the quality risk management is supported to proposed with the change management protocol. If multiple changes are to be implemented, these activities should address the potential risk from cumulative effect of multiple changes. The MH should demonstrate that the protocol suitable scientific knowledge and understanding of aspects impacted by the proposed change in order to conduct appropriate risk assessment. Typically, more complex changes would require enhanced product and process understanding. If we look at the modification of the approved change protocol, so it again falls into the same two categories. So modification should provide the same greater capability to assess the impact and would involve a notification type of communication with the regulatory authority. Modification that more significantly alters the content of the protocol will require a prior approval or submission of a new protocol. Moving to the types of the post-approval change management protocol. So we can see one or more changes for a single product. So a change management protocol can be designed to be used repeatedly to make a specific type of CMC change over the product life cycle, applying same principles. If the protocol describes several changes for a particular product, a justification should be added showing how the changes are related and that inclusion in a single protocol is appropriate. The second are the broader protocols. The risk of proposed changes should be similar across products. Additional considerations should be taken into account depending on the approach. For example, one or more changes to be implemented across multiple products. The same mitigation strategy should be applicable across all impacted products, and one or more changes to be implemented across multiple products and multiple sites. So same mitigation strategy should be applicable across all impacted products and or sites. Moving with the fifth point, product lifecycle management document. So the product lifecycle management document outlines the specific plan of the product lifecycle management, including the established condition, reporting category for changes to the ECs, the change management protocols, and any post-approval CMC commitment. Its purpose is to encourage prospective lifecycle management planning by the authorization holder and to facilitate regulatory assessment and inspection. The change management protocol, the product lifecycle document, should be updated throughout the product lifecycle as needed. It serves as a central repository in the manufacturing authorization for the established conditions and reporting categories for making changes. It includes key elements described below and referenced to information located elsewhere in the authorization. Submission of the product lifecycle management document is critical when the MAH proposes ECs in line with the risk-based approaches. So the elements include the established conditions, reporting category for making changes to these approved established conditions, the post-approval change management protocols, and the post-approval CMC commitments. If we look at submitting of the PLC, the PLCM document is submitted in the original manufacturing authorization or in a supplement variation for the marketed products by defining ECs. Looking into the maintenance of the product lifecycle management document, an updated document should be included in post-approval submissions for the CMC changes. Document will capture changes in the ECs and other associated elements and their reporting categories. The MAH should follow regional expectations for maintaining revision history of the lifecycle management document. A tabular format is recommended to capture certain elements of the lifecycle management document, but other appropriate formats can also be used. Pharmaceutical quality system and the change management. So an effective pharmaceutical quality system as per ICH Q10 is necessary across entire supply chain and product life cycle to support use of tools described in this guideline. It includes appropriate change management enabled by knowledge management and management review. Maintenance of an effective pharmaceutical quality system is the responsibility of the manufacturing sites and the authorization holder. Conduction of inspection for submitted authorizations and surveillance will continue by the regulatory authority. Manufacturing site can be considered GMP compliance while resolving deficiencies that do not require regulatory action. If such deficiencies have impact on the effectiveness of change management, it may result in restrictions on ability to utilize flexibility in this guideline. If we look into the general consideration of knowledge management and change management process, these are very two important aspects. And knowledge management generally, which includes the CAPAs, management review, product and process reviews, PQRs, etc. Based on the knowledge gain, it is then a stimulus for the change. So from the knowledge gain, there is a stimulus for the change. And when the stimulus for the change is there, that change is specifically evaluated. So that change goes for evaluation based on scientific and risk-based approach. Then there is internal change approval. So once the change has been evaluated, there's approval of the change, internal approval. And based, if we can see this column, this is the established conditions column. So if that change is into the established condition, it is evaluated for the reporting category. If it requires a prior approval, it goes to the prior approval for the regulatory authority, and then it goes into the implementation stage. However, if it is not a prior approval change request, it directly goes into the implementation. If it goes directly to the implementation, it is again evaluated if a notification is required to the regulatory authority for the established condition. If a notification is required, the notification is given. If a notification also is not required and the change is to be implemented as for the pharmaceutical quality system, then the implement change is again, it becomes the part of a knowledge management system. So this is an overall cycle where knowledge management, change management, and established conditions are overall linked with each other. The change management across the supply chain. So supply chain involves multiple stakeholders, generally like the authorization holders, R&Ds, manufacturers, suppliers, etc. They must interact to effectively utilize the knowledge and manage change during the product life cycle. Change management activities should be considered. Changes to the ECs be communicated timely between the authorization holders and the regulators, as well as between the manufacturing chain. Timeliness of the communication should be driven by the impact to the ECs and targeted to entities that need to be aware and implement the change. Process knowledge and continual improvement are drivers for the change. Example, CMO may propose process improvements. Data can be used to revise ECs and the lifecycle management document. Organization responsible for batch release should be aware of all the changes. Communication mechanism regarding manufacturing authorization changes and GMP issues should be defined in relevant documentation, including contracts with CMOs. A critical failure in the pharmaceutical quality system anywhere in the supply chain may impact ability to use tools in this guideline. Therefore, companies should communicate such failures to the affected regulatory authorities within the time frame. Moving to point number 7, relationship between regulatory assessment and inspection. Regulatory assessment and inspections are complementary. Their fundamental roles remain unchanged. Effective communication between assessors and inspectors can facilitate regulatory oversight of product lifecycle management. Appropriate mechanisms to share knowledge and information obtained through inspection or assessment activities can facilitate access to necessary information and mitigate increased submission burden. Example, conclusion from inspection should be available to assessors to support ongoing oversight of product lifecycle management, and most recent lifecycle management document should be available to inspectors so that they are aware of the currently approved status of the lifecycle management elements. Communication is encouraged between regulators across regions in accordance with appropriate bilateral, multilateral arrangements. Example, to communicate about critical failures of a company's PQS that may impact the use of tools described in this guideline. The guideline also discusses about the structured approach for frequent CMC post-approval changes. So strategy of the structured approach for frequent CMC changes is exemplified with description of approach for analytical procedure changes into the Annex 2 of this guideline. And similar structured approach should be developed and applied for other frequent CMC changes. So we'll look into the Annex 2 in detail. The approaches may be applied when company's pharmaceutical quality system change management process is effective and incorporates an appropriate risk management system. Structured approach can be found in Annex 2, which we'll discuss, and describes scope and steps to be followed, including where appropriate, data to be generated and criteria to be met, compliance with requirements and international standards. If the approach is followed and all criteria are met, changes can be made with immediate or most implementation notification to relevant regulatory authorities. Flexibility provided in Annex 2 may not be available in all regions and in all situations. Some specific changes may require prior approval as well. Point number 9, the stability data approaches to support evaluation of the CMC changes. Data needed for submission established by the regional regulations. This guideline provides an additional science and risk-based approach to develop strategies for confirmatory stability studies supporting post-approval changes, and it may be included in the change management protocol. Purpose of the stability study is to confirm previously approved shelf life and storage conditions. Scope and design of such studies should be as per acquired product. Approaches to design such studies should be justified and may include identifying stability related quality attributes and shelf life limiting attributes relative to the intended change, use of tools to evaluate impact of intended change including drug substance product accelerated or stress studies, pre and post change comparability studies, statistical evaluation of data, predictive degradation and other empirical kinetics, utilization of prior knowledge including scientific literatures, use of confirmatory stability studies post change instead of submission of data as part of regulatory submission, and commitment to initiate or complete ongoing long-term stability or post-change batches can assure approved shelf life and storage conditions. Moving to Appendix 2, Principles of Change Management, it captures stimuli for change, including those that can improve product performance and process robustness. Full understanding of scope of change and its implications. Leverages existing process performance and product quality knowledge. Requires science-based risk management and categorization of change. Determines data needed to support change and develops study protocols describing methods and acceptance criteria. Ensures that an appropriate regulatory submission is filed. Uses a defined change control process to approve or reject intended change. Ensures implementation of change is based on review of change as implementation remains aligned with relevant protocols and assessment of data generated to demonstrate that change objective and acceptance criteria are met. Ensures that risk mitigating steps are developed in case of deviation from acceptance criteria or identification of unanticipated changes. Verifies post-implementation the relevant changes have been effective in achieving desired outcome with no unintended consequence. If deviation associated with post-approval changes are detected, ensure issue is managed via company deviation management. And for post-implementation, capture new product process knowledge gained during implementation. Ensures regulatory filings are updated and assessments is made to update the lifecycle management document. Ensures that change is included and assessed as a part of product quality review. Change management system should be available for review during audit and inspection. Appendix 2 also talks about use of knowledge in the change management. Effective change management includes active knowledge management. That is, information from multiple sources is integrated to identify stimuli for the changes as we have seen into the previous diagram. Sources can include the development studies, process understanding, product knowledge, product trending, and provisions should be made for sharing such knowledge between the MAH and the relevant manufacturing stakeholders. There should be a mechanism to provide a holistic view of quality performance for a product quality regularly, which is in the form of PQR. Should include steps taken to identify and manage sources of variability, which allows identification of further need for change to apparent when the data are reviewed in isolation. As described in ICH Quality Implementation Working Group on Q8, Q9 and Q10, there is no added regulatory requirement for formal knowledge management system. And it also gives details for management review. Monitoring timelines of change management system to assure changes are implemented timely, commensurate with the criticality. If delayed, an assessment and mitigation of the risk associated with delay should be made. Monitoring performance of change management systems such as assessing frequency of intended changes that are not approved for implementation by the quality unit, and ensuring that post-implementation verification occurs and reviewing results of that verification as a measure of change management effectiveness, that is, to identify improvements of the change management system. With this, we come to the end of this presentation. Hope you have liked this presentation. Kindly subscribe to the channel Prof Talks to get more information onto the pharmaceutical quality system. Thank you.